especially with something like the Passion that I did. The written word was very important. You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff.
What if the Bible you have trusted your entire life is only a filtered version of something much older? Not incomplete by mistake, but deliberately reduced. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved something the rest of the world never saw. An 81-book Bible with a completely different structure. Inside it, there are visions of layered heavens and a version of Jesus that doesn't match the one we believed for centuries. But here is where it gets uncomfortably serious. Because Mel Gibson, the director behind The Passion of the Christ, is preparing for a long-awaited sequel, and in those scriptures, he has come across something that feels like it was never meant to be read outside those walls. Something that changes the entire way the story of Jesus is understood. So what exactly is written in that oldest version of the Bible? And why is Mel Gibson preparing to show it to the world in its most truthful form? Against everything we were taught to believe? Let's understand the full story. Gibson's Forbidden Project. In 2004, Mel Gibson directed The Passion of the Christ, one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in American history. It depicted the final 12 hours of Jesus' life with a brutality that left theaters shaken. The scourging, the crown of thorns, the slow collapsing march to Calvary. Critics called it excessive. Some even called it the most unflinching portrayal of Christ's suffering ever committed to film. Even more, it was shot in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, languages almost nobody in modern cinema dares to use. So, because of all those reasons, studios didn't want it. They saw it as risky, too dark, too heavy, too unmarketable. Some even called it a suicide project for his career. And yet, it exploded. More than $600 million worldwide. One of the highest-grossing religious films ever made. But what most people forget is this. Gibson didn't just direct it. He personally financed a large part of it himself. Around $30 million came directly from his own pocket, because no major studio wanted to take the risk. But here is the truth that will send chills down your spine. Gibson has said repeatedly, publicly, that the film only told the first half of the story. And for more than 20 years, he has already been developing a sequel. He calls it the project that haunts him, something he couldn't walk away from, even when Hollywood distance grew between him and the industry itself. It is now officially titled The Resurrection of the Christ. 2 parts. Lionsgate distribution. A reported $100 million budget. Production underway at Cinecittà Studios in Rome. Part 1 releases on Good Friday, 2027. Part 2 arrives 40 days later on Ascension Day. And according to people connected to the production, even the actors working on it say the scale feels unlike anything they've ever experienced. Something that doesn't feel like a normal biblical film. But here's what nobody tells you about what Gibson has been describing. In a 2022 interview, he said the film will not follow a simple linear story. It will not stay in one timeline. Instead, it will move across events, across time itself, past, present, and something he called entirely different realms. He said the story has to begin with the fall of the angels, and to do that, you cannot stay in normal reality. You have to go somewhere else. Another realm entirely. Then, on the Joe Rogan Experience, he went further. He revealed he is working from 2 scripts. One is structured in a traditional way. The other is something he described as more like an acid trip version of the same story. Layered, strange, and difficult to follow in a normal sense. And that's where things start to feel different. Because this idea, Christ moving through multiple heavens, facing fallen beings, passing through hell itself, is not something new. It all comes from a book written centuries before Jesus was even born, and what it contains is the reason why it was kept hidden from the world. The book they hid from us. That book is the Book of Enoch, especially the version preserved in the Ethiopian Bible. And what makes it so important is that it reflects something closer to the earliest form of the Bible itself. It was written centuries before the birth of Jesus, possibly as early as 300 BC, and for most of Western history, you were never meant to read it. But what's inside it is what makes this hard to ignore, because buried in its pages is a description of a divine figure so detailed, so specific, that once you see it, one question starts to press in: why was this kept out? In chapter 46, Enoch describes a figure with hair white like wool, a face filled with grace, surrounded by rivers of fire in what looks like a heavenly courtroom. Angels fall to their knees, the wicked are judged, and at the center stands a being of blazing light, passing judgment over all creation. He is called the Son of Man, the Chosen One, the righteous judge. And this figure doesn't appear once. He appears again and again throughout the text, not as a gentle teacher, but as a being of overwhelming authority, deciding the fate of every soul that has ever existed. Now hold that image and compare it to something else. The book of Revelation, which was written by John of Patmos nearly centuries later. It describes a figure whose hair is white like wool, whose eyes burn like fire, whose feet resemble polished bronze refined in a furnace. A voice like rushing waters, like thunder. A presence so intense it cannot be fully looked at. Line by line, image by image, the parallels begin to stack. Both describe fire, both describe judgment, both describe a figure that is not just human, but something far beyond it. Now picture a scholar sitting alone late at night, both texts open in front of him. Enoch on one side, Revelation on the other. Dr. George Nicholsberg spent decades studying these writings, reading them again and again until the pattern became impossible to ignore. His conclusion was simple but heavy. Revelation wasn't creating something new. It was echoing something much older, and it doesn't stop there. The Epistle of Jude, which is part of the Bible today, directly quotes Enoch almost word for word. Early church figures like Tertullian and Irenaeus treated it as real scripture. Scholars confirm it was widely known during the time the New Testament was forming. It wasn't hidden back then, it was part of the conversation. And then, centuries later, that changed. In 363 AD, the Council of Laodicea rejected it. The text was labeled as dangerous. Copies were destroyed, and access to it slowly disappeared from the Western world. Yet, some copies survived, and what they contain goes far beyond just a description. It begins to reshape the entire understanding of who Christ was and what his role actually meant. But that leads to a deeper question. How did any of this survive at all when it was meant to disappear? The last keepers of ancient texts. Missionaries from Syria once traveled south into what was then known as the Kingdom of Aksum, and they didn't come empty-handed. They carried texts, entire collections of early Christian writings, and left them in a place the rest of the world would eventually lose contact with. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its roots back to the 4th century, under King Ezana of Aksum. That makes it one of the oldest continuous Christian traditions on earth, and from the beginning, its scriptures were preserved in Ge'ez, an ancient sacred language that developed into its own literary system long before Latin or Greek fully shaped Western Christianity. Then, history took a turn. When Islamic expansion swept across North Africa in the 7th century, Ethiopia became something rare, a Christian island, surrounded, cut off, and isolated from the rest of the Christian world. No councils, no decrees, no large-scale book burnings reaching its borders, and that isolation changed everything. High in the Tigray Mountains, in monasteries carved directly into sheer cliff faces, places reachable only by rope or bare hands, monks continued their work. Generation after generation, they copied texts by hand. Some manuscripts took months, some took years, and they kept going. Not because they believed they were hiding something dangerous, but because they believed they were preserving something sacred. To them, These were not forbidden writings. They were the truth, exactly as it had always been passed down. And what they saved didn't stay hidden forever. At one point, a French art historian named Jacques Mercier traveled into one of these remote monasteries, a place almost untouched by the outside world. He expected to document history. He wasn't prepared for what he found. He described it as a physical shock. Full-color illustrations of Christ's life, preserved in stunning detail for over 1,500 years. Pages no outsider had studied in living memory. Among them, the Garima Gospels, later dated by Oxford researchers to between 330 and 660 AD, are some of the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts known to exist. And then there was something even more striking: the Ethiopian Bible itself. Up to 88 books. Compare that to 66 in the Protestant Bible or 73 in the Catholic version. This wasn't a difference in detail. These were entirely separate texts. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah. Complete writings that early Christians once read, quoted, and treated as sacred. But that disappeared from the Western canon over time. And inside those texts, the picture of Jesus begins to look very different, not just in detail, but in scale, in presence, in what he actually is. And once you see that version, it becomes harder to go back to the one most people were given, the hidden version of Christ. When you read those Ethiopian texts, you start to understand what Gibson meant when he said, "The Christ he is building for 2027 is something never shown on screen before, because the image most people carry is very different. In Western art and tradition, Jesus is calm, gentle, comforting. Soft eyes, peaceful expression, the good shepherd, the friend of sinners, the one who turns the other cheek. And those qualities are real, but they are not the full picture. Because in the Ethiopian texts, something else appears underneath all of that, something much harder to ignore. Christ is not just kind. He is vast, overwhelming, something that feels closer to a force than a figure. Not only a savior, but also a judge. Not only a healer, but also something that carries authority over everything that exists. His hair is described like wool lit by light, his eyes like fire, not symbolic in a simple way, but intense, almost unbearable to look at. His face shines with a brightness that doesn't feel human, something closer to raw light itself, and his presence doesn't stay contained. It affects everything around him. His voice doesn't just speak, it echoes across realms, it shakes mountains, it splits the waters, it commands obedience from beings that are not human. And this is where the claim becomes stronger, because according to this view, this wasn't a later interpretation. This was the earlier one, a version preserved in isolation, while over time, other traditions began presenting something more controlled, more understandable, something easier to approach without fear. But it doesn't stop at how he looks. It moves into what he teaches. In one passage, Jesus says, "You are not children of dust, but children of light." And that changes everything, because if that is true, then the divine is not distant. It is already within, not something controlled or given, but something already present. And once that idea enters the picture, the structure built around access to God begins to look very different. No middle layer, no controlled path, no single authority standing between a person and the divine. And suddenly, this is no longer just about belief. It becomes about power, about control, about who defines the path. And that's where the tension rises. Because if this version of Christ is real, if this is the one those texts preserved, then what Gibson is about to show is not just another interpretation. It's something that follows a very specific, very old map, one that leads far beyond anything most people expect to see. What Gibson is about to reveal. When Gibson described his film, Christ moving through other realms, watching angels fall, descending into hell, he wasn't describing something new. He was describing something that had already been written down nearly 2,000 years ago in a text called The Ascension of Isaiah. This is where things become very precise. Because this text doesn't speak in vague spiritual ideas, it lays out a structure, a system, 7 distinct levels of heaven, each one different, each one with its own beings, its own rules, its own distance from the divine. In the first heaven, angels oversee the earth. In the second, the movements of stars are directed. In the third, Isaiah sees paradise, the tree of life, gates of living fire, ground that looks like crystallized light. And as he moves higher, it becomes harder to even exist there. By the 6th heaven, he collapses. The presence is too much for a human body to handle. And yet, even that is not the highest level, because above it is the 7th heaven, a realm no created being can survive by nature. And there, Isaiah sees the one who is about to descend. And this is where the text changes everything, because it doesn't describe a simple fall from heaven to earth. It describes a controlled descent. At each level, Christ doesn't reveal himself fully. He hides it. In the 6th heaven, he appears like a being of that level. In the 5th, he lowers himself again. Layer by layer, he reduces what he shows, not because he loses power, but because he chooses to hold it back. The infinite, compressing itself into something smaller. And by the time he reaches earth, even angels cannot recognize him. They see only a human child, unaware of what is actually there. And then comes the part most people never hear described this way: the crucifixion, not just as suffering, but as something much larger, a rupture, the source of life itself, going silent, not symbolically, but in a way that affects everything. And then the resurrection, not just a body returning, but every layer of limitation removed at once. Something so intense that the people who saw it were not comforted, they were overwhelmed. And this exact sequence, the descent, the concealment, the rupture, the return, was written long before any modern film existed, which means Gibson isn't building something new. He's following a structure that was already there. But even this, these journeys through heaven, through layers, through hidden forms, are only part of something bigger. Because behind all of it is a deeper question about what reality itself is made of. The source of all being. In Ethiopian churches, Christ is not introduced as just a teacher or a moral guide. He is called the Lord of the universe, both gentle and overwhelming at the same time. Fire and light, power and compassion, held together in one presence. Even the way he is shown is different. Dark skin, deep, steady eyes, surrounded by gold light. Fully human, but clearly something far beyond human at the same time. And the order is different too. In Western tradition, comfort comes first. You are told he loves you, forgives you, understands you. In the Ethiopian view, that comes later. First, you feel the weight of who is standing in front of you. Then comes the comfort. And once you see how they understand him, the miracles start to look completely different. They are not random acts of kindness. They are corrections. When he calms the storm, it is not just power over nature. The wind recognizes the one who made it, and it stops. When he walks on water, the water responds to the voice that called it into existence, and it holds him. When he heals someone, it is not just compassion. It is creation being restored to how it was meant to be. When he raises the dead, it is life being commanded to return, not requested, not hoped for, ordered. Every miracle is saying the same thing, again and again. I made this, and it still answers to me. And then comes the deeper idea. In these texts, Christ is described as the living Word, not just someone who speaks truth, but the very thing through which reality exists. Light, sound, matter, life, everything flows through that word, held in place every moment. By word here, It means the divine principle of order, the force through which reality exists and is sustained. So if that word were ever removed, nothing would slowly fall apart. It wouldn't decay. It wouldn't break down. It would just stop instantly. That idea sounds almost like modern physics when you hear it. Energy, frequency, vibration. But here, it is not science. It is a belief, a way of saying that existence itself depends on something beyond it. And what's strange is how close all of this came to being ignored completely. For years, scholars in the West treated these Ethiopian manuscripts like side notes, interesting, but not central, until researchers started looking closer, dating them, comparing them, realizing what had been preserved. And now, slowly, the picture is changing. Because the place many assumed was on the edges of Christian history might have been holding something much closer to its center. And when you step back and look at everything together, Gibson's film, the ancient texts, the preserved manuscripts, it all starts pointing to one final truth. The final shared truth. Gibson is deeply Christian, and he has repeated it for years. He trusts the Bible completely, and yet the vision he keeps describing does not come from the version most people know. It lines up far more closely with something else, with Enoch's visions, with Isaiah's ascent through layered heavens, with the Ethiopian texts that preserved both. And that's where everything starts to come together. Because now you are not looking at one strange idea anymore. You are looking at the same pattern, appearing in different places, across different centuries, written by different people who never met each other. Enoch describes a blazing figure of judgment. Isaiah describes a descent through multiple heavens. Ethiopian tradition preserves a Christ who holds reality together itself. So the question shifts. Not who copied who, not even who hid what, but why do these ideas keep repeating? Why does the same image, the same kind of Christ, keep showing up in completely different texts? Because maybe this is not about one version replacing another. Maybe it's about multiple attempts to describe the same thing, the same presence, seen from different angles, written in different languages, shaped by different cultures, but still carrying the same core. And if that's true, then the difference between traditions is not as simple as right and wrong. It becomes something else: perspective. Now pause for a moment and look at what that means for Gibson's film. If he follows through with what he has described, audiences won't just see a new version of Jesus. They will see a version that feels unfamiliar, but strangely consistent with something much older. A figure of immense scale, stepping into human form, moving through suffering, and then breaking back into something far beyond it. Not a gentle revision, something closer to the original intensity these texts were trying to capture. And then there are the monks. For centuries, they kept copying these manuscripts by hand in isolated places with no audience, no recognition. They didn't know about films or global audiences or anything like this. They just preserved what they believed mattered. And now, Mel Gibson, one of America's greatest directors, is preparing to bring that same vision to the world in a way no one has ever seen before. So the question is, are you ready for it? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on what happens next and like watching more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one. Until then, thanks for watching.